Welcome back to Whiskey Uncut. I'm your host, Paul, joined by James.
Who was here 30 minutes early. I thought it started at 6.
Yeah, well, you know what? At least you're here
I'm
on
on
time.
time.
If
Yeah,
nothing else,
I
you got to
I was prompt.
sit there, watch me eat a
Yeah,
burger.
that was good. That was
Yeah,
good.
it was
probably
quite enthralling.
It might be the best thing that's going to happen in the next hour and a half is watching you eat a burger.
So actually, I got to give a shout out to Chef Me, Gainesville's local meal kit delivery service, because I gave them that recipe for that burger.
That's why. Yeah,
It's a fig, jam and bacon and brie burger with arugula.
So where did you steal the recipe from?
From my mind. See, I'm a master chef, James.
Oh,
and
that's true. Yeah.
So
I forgot about that.
No, but today's episode, what you suggested, which I thought was a good idea. What is clinking? One of your glasses is too close together.
No,
You need
mine
to
are
fix
not
it.
touching. It
Or
might be
bottles.
these. Yeah.
Okay. You suggested is whether or not you should swirl your whiskey.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that would be fun to talk about because it gets into I think the very esoteric, snooty side of
It's not quite as snooty as it is with wine.
yeah.
But
I think
yeah.
I think it's close because I think on the one hand you have people that drink whiskey as they put it in a heavy tumbler, they just like to casually sip on it. These are the people that are putting ice in their whiskey. Nothing wrong with that, except that it's wrong.
Except that you're wrong. Except that you're ruining your whiskey. Other than that, though, it's fine.
Right. But other than that, it's fine. And so I think the swirling it to release the aroma or release the flavors or whatever comes from the wine world originally. And I think it definitely works with wine in my opinion. But wine is also much tamer spirit, and so I don't know that whiskey needs the help.
No, and we can get into some of the nerdy science of that when we start that.
Yeah. So let's take a look at some news real quick. And this comes back to something we talked about a while ago. Last season, actually.
Was it last season?
It was last season that was originally announced, but this is the Macallan Horizon. So the Macallan Horizon, for those of you that listened to that episode, was touted
which is
by Macallan.
Tens of thousands of people
as
probably listen to that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. As the first horizontal whiskey. James. And
this is one of my favorite, quote unquote, innovations. Talked about.
I love the fact that it's horizontal is that they took a regular bottle, a normal cylindrical shaped bottle, and they turned it on its side and put a little pedestal underneath so that it wouldn't roll away.
Right.
That's what makes it a horizontal design.
Yeah, and I have some debates about that. I think I've seen some other horizontal bottles, but whatever.
And it's also, I won't go back and read the whole press release about them mastering space and time, but it was quite floofy.
Yes.
So anyway, we didn't know at the time. They had not announced the price. And so we now have Whiskey Advocate came up with announced, because it's actually come out now. Luxury British car companies love whiskey, and these 4 bottles are proof is the title of the article. But because this was a collaboration with Bentley Motors, and so the metal on the bottle is reclaimed from a Bentley, and the glass is reclaimed from a Bentley, and the wood and all this stuff. And Bentley Motors is in the world of horizontal movement, as Macallan stated.
That's true.
And so they were the perfect partner for a horizontal.
All other cars do not go horizontal.
Yep.
So it makes sense.
So this is a non-age statement whiskey.
Oh man.
ABV 46.6%. 6 first fill sherry seasoned casks used. MSRP $50,000. For a non-age statement.
And there's 700 available. Somebody is making some serious bank on this release.
Gosh. What is that? Is that 35 million if you do 700 times 50,000? I think it is. I think it's $35 million off of
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Off of
a horizontal
6
whiskey.
barrels of whiskey.
That is just insane, man.
For this,
okay, so they said 6 barrels.
Yeah, 6 first fill sherry season casks.
And what's the proof?
46.6.
Okay, so you could probably get to a rough estimate of age if you actually went through the calculations there, because you're looking at that proof probably what 300 bottles, 350 bottles in a full barrel, maybe a little bit more.
Well, I don't know if these are. They
we
call
don't know
them
what
casks.
size
They
they
could
are,
be.
too.
It could. Usually, when they say like a sherry cask, they mean like a sherry butt.
And those are big.
And those are big. Those are like 800 bottles.
Yeah.
Or,
So this might be a pretty old, but you think if it was
I would
really
hope.
old, they would.
I would hope,
right?
Yeah.
You think that if it was super old, they'd age date.
Well, it's clearly not old enough to be age stated
Yeah.
worth $50,000. So my thought is one of these first fill casks is probably like 20 years old. And then probably the other one is like 60 years old or something. Yeah. And my thought when I see this is because in Scotland the proof's going down, right? Once it gets below 40, you can't use it as whiskey unless you blend in younger stock that's higher proof. So my guess is they had 1 or 2 barrels of like 60-year-old scotch that's below 40%, and they wanted to use it, and it's really valuable because it tastes just like wood in an old warehouse.
But you can't call it a whiskey.
But you can't call it whiskey. So the value of the bottle, that's probably how they arrived at the value. Or they just picked a number out of thin air because they can and people will buy it. But then they blended, younger stuff with it to bring up the proof. And that's why they didn't want to age state it, though, is because the younger stock is in there.
I think you're a lot more optimistic than I am.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That
I just assumed it was all young crap.
I'm saying if they're on the good side of being honest about the valuation of the whiskey, then it's probably 50, 60-year-old stuff in there.
Yeah.
That just got too low proof. But anyway. Here's what the Macallan master whiskey maker, Kirstine Campbell, ventured to say. Where Bentley makes its bespoke vehicles to get a sense of the craftsmanship behind the machines, I wanted to bring the essence of Bentley into a whiskey, Campbell tells us. Seeing Bentley's process was a wonderful sensory experience. Seeing the tannery hides used for the leather seats and steering wheel, the smell of the wood shop, feeling the knurling on the switchgear.
Oh, boy.
It gave me a great starting point for making whiskey.
Wow.
What struck with Campbell were notes of polished wood, sumptuous leather, and the distinct aroma of the raw wood used in Bentley veneers. A lot about the wood.
Lots of wood. Yeah.
Apparently, there's not much.
That's all that's in a Bentley is wood.
That's the first time I would hope that the master whiskey maker Macallan has been inspired by wood.
Yeah.
Prior to.
It took a car to get him, to get him thinking about wood.
Fun fact, if you send Bentley a tree that's felled from your estate, it will happily process this into interior paneling for your vehicle. That's actually kind of cool.
Yeah.
So anyway, she says, I was checking for individual flavors, then working up combinations of those. I came across casks with a lovely fresh leather note or a rich resinous note, but it's more complex than yanking a few of those. There was a fair amount of digging and blending. Rarely do you get it right the first time. Campbell shares that the non-age statement reflects the focus on flavor instead of being constrained by a number.
Well, of course.
Yep.
Yeah, of course.
As all non-age statement whiskeys are. To achieve the right final product, Campbell went through 6 blends, all first fill sherry casks, and blend number 6 was selected as the winner. So, yep, that's the bottle.
Wow.
Overall, it's decadent and sumptuous is the review.
Yeah, as I would expect.
I would hope it would be incredible for $50,000. It's such an absurd.
How do you get to be
rich enough to afford that?
I was gonna say famous enough to even try it. Like
work at Whiskey Advocate.
At what point do you get a sample
for real,
of a $50,000 bottle being sent?
Actually, there's some YouTubers who get invited to stuff like that. Yeah.
We haven't even.
They have better connection. They're way better connections.
We haven't even gotten a bottle of like Old Weller.
No.
So like I don't know how anybody gets these.
To be fair, I haven't really asked for stuff.
Well, we tried a few times with Buffalo Trace.
Well, yeah, but we didn't get shut down. The person left, or they quit, or whatever. So
yeah,
or maybe they got fired because they were gonna give us.
They were talking to us.
Yeah. So then we have the Bowmore 22-year-old Aston Martin selection with ABV 51.5%, 22 years old, cask type mixture of European oak, Oloroso sherry, American oak hogsheads, $400.
Yeah.
That's a lot more reasonable.
Yeah.
Still pricey. I have seen relatively good things about the Bentley. The previous Aston Martin. Bowmore has collaborated with Aston Martin several times. Again, I don't understand the collaboration between cars and whiskey, other than that they're both luxury
I think that's
products,
what they're doing.
and that's all
the
it
only
is.
thing they're doing.
It's odd to me and cheesy, like regardless of if it's good whiskey. There's nothing that a car has to do with whiskey. So, but anyway, the Bowmore 22-year-old, that is $400, and then going on to Coach built whiskey crossover with Rolls Royce is a 30-year-old.
I've never even heard of Coach Build. Have you?
No, it's a brand
launched
that
in
launched in
2022. There we go.
As a partnership between whiskey writer George Kataskis and former Formula One world champion driver Jenson Button. So there you go, another celebrity whiskey. Coach built whiskey, Build Number 1, is the core product, a blend of malt and grain whiskeys sourced from all five Scotch regions, and then finished in Spanish sherry casks. Coach built is a blend of ultra-aged malt and grain, some up to 35 years old, the bulk of which spent time in sherry casks. Half of the 3,000 bottles are available to Rolls-Royce London clients, while the other half are available through Coach Built's website. $1,900. Well, for a 30-year-old, that's not too bad, although it is blended. And that's pretty pricey for a blend.
Well, and it's impressive that a company that just started a year and a half ago is already releasing a $2,000 whiskey.
Yeah, well,
you started with some cash.
Go big or go home.
Yeah, I was worried about starting with $90 bottles.
Yeah.
So.
Well, why didn't you release a 30-year-old whiskey as your first?
I should have called up like Volkswagen and done like a 6-year-old Volkswagen whiskey.
And then we have Jack Daniel's McLaren edition, ABV 40%, cask American oak, SRP $45. How did that end up on this list?
Poor McLaren. Like,
oh my gosh,
they're just getting shit on it.
Dude, how? That is wild. Like
$45.
Like,
seriously, that's not a typo.
No.
Like, it's not $145 at least.
I don't think so.
They probably have. Oh, that's weird.
Limited edition bottles designed with McLaren's papaya orange hue. So I think it's the exact same whiskey. It's just a different label on it.
Oh man, yeah.
Yeah, traditional.
So it's the same thing.
Yeah, it's just yep. So anyway, yeah, that's what happens when you have crossovers of whiskey with you see, however, how these British brands view the Scotch versus bourbon.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
When they partner with a Scotch brand, they release a $50,000 ultra premium luxury deluxe thing that's bespoke. And when they reach out to an American brand, they're like
$45.
They're like, yeah, you can use our color.
Yeah, you can just throw
But we prefer not to be too closely associated.
I like that we're combining drinking and driving in
I know,
our whiskey
for real.
releases now.
And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is this: Peerless tries its hand at toast.
Oh.
So I wanted to talk about this just because you have had some thoughts about Peerless in the past.
I'm generally not a huge fan of Peerless. But...
Yeah. So this is the toasted barrel whiskeys have been around in some shape since 2014 when Michter's pioneered the style with the US 1 bourbon. While toasting does occur during the char process, toasting barrels more deeply before charring is less common, as it's an extra step that adds cost and time. So Kentucky Peerless is the latest to join the ranks with their new toasted bourbon. Peerless toasted bourbon is aged in 2 separate oak barrels, spending the first phase of maturation in the distillery's standard char level 3 barrel before being finished in a medium toast barrel, a barrel that's toasted about an hour at a lower level heat than a charred counterpart. While the first barrel adds flavor of caramel, brown sugar, and toffee, the toasted barrel imparts honey, vanilla, toasted spice. Toasted Bourbon Batch 1 will be released March 16th at 10 a.m. at the Peerless Distillery, and nationwide suggested retail is $124. So, what do you think? Do you think that might save it? Because you have not been wild about Peerless's flavor profile. Do you think a toasted approach might convert you?
Possibly. I think my problem with Peerless in the past has always been that everything is very young and it's very expensive. And so when I drink Peerless, a lot of times to me it still tastes grainy. So
Right.
maybe giving it some extra time in that toasted barrel would help. Did they say anything about age on here? It doesn't. It just says 2 separate phases, but they're not telling
Yeah.
you an age statement. So maybe it won't make any difference. Maybe it will. It's funny that you brought up this article though, because I was listening to another podcast today and they were talking about innovations in bourbon. And one of the things that they were talking about was toasted barrels. Like that was, it was kind of a big innovation. So they're like, where are we going to go from here? And they were asking whether or not toasted barrels were going to be a bigger thing. And I don't know. The problem with toasted barrels is they're just damn sweet. And so when you put a sweet product like bourbon into a toasted barrel, sometimes it just gets too sweet for me. I prefer toasted barrels with things like rye. I think Michter's toasted barrel rye is fantastic. Like, because you get the kind of spicy sweet combo. But I don't know. Again, you're taking a risk at $125 for what's probably a 3 or 4 year whiskey.
Right. And I feel like personally, I've just kind of found that toasted toasted whiskey in general is kind of weird. Like it has a distinct kind of character to it that has typically not been my favorite. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I think we've never really tried. We should get a series of toasted barrels on here and try them. I remember you trying a few and you weren't a huge fan.
By the way, I hate the fact that Stag Junior looks like the front on the back. Like the the back label looks like a front label.
It's almost double-sided.
Yeah, it's very distracting. Anyway. Okay, so let's kick off our blind tasting because we got to let these settle for a second because we just poured them,
which we just agitated it.
Which we just agitated it.
Yeah.
So we're starting with Weller 12, and this is ABV 45%, and from Buffalo Trace.
Yes, and so I decided to bring. We were talking a little bit beforehand. We decided to go with whiskeys that we thought had a pretty strong nose.
Yeah, pretty good aroma.
Yeah, and so I thought it would be fun to do a lower proof version and a higher proof version. So I brought Weller 12, and then we also brought Stag Junior. And I think that should give us a pretty good read for it. And so just a little bit of backstory on this, why I mentioned this was when I first started writing articles for Bourbon Sippers, one of the guys that I was working with swore that he could tell when you swirled whiskey. And to this day, I do not believe it. I don't believe it for a second. And not only did he swear that he could tell when you had swirled it or not, he thought it made it worse.
Really?
Yeah. And I understand, like, there's certain things that I can kind of comprehend, but for the life of me, I can't come up with an explanation as to why it would make it worse. I could see where it might not do anything, and I could see potentially, given oxidation, like maybe it would make it a little bit better, but for the life of me, I can't understand why it would make it worse.
I think, out of the way, I think, James, it's because you're bruising the whiskey.
It's just so delicate.
It's so delicate. So
Yeah.
I've kind of seen that sentiment expressed before. Early on when I was, getting into whiskey, I saw people talking about that with regards to swirling it and all that, as far as like, if you over agitate it, basically you're over oxidizing the whiskey.
Yeah.
And you're essentially, you're making it as though the whiskey has been sitting out for too long, right? Because if you think about, like, when you pour a glass of whiskey, a lot of whiskeys will change over time as it sits in the glass. Like when you first go to smell it, the aroma might be restrained, and it'll kind of shift as it sits in the glass, what comes in and comes out as being the focal point of the aroma. And then if you leave a whiskey out overnight and come back to it, it's gross. Like it gets way, and it'll turn like milky, and
I don't know that
it gets nasty, right? So what I've seen people talk about is the argument is that when you swirling it, you're over oxidizing it, and so it might help right at the beginning, but then you sit there for an hour and you keep swirling it. And I mean, like, some people are like crazy about it. They're like,
Yeah.
you know, practically like shaking up the glass, right? And so I've seen people talk about it from that perspective. I personally, I can't see how doing that, you know, unless you sat there for like 8 hours swirling your whiskey. Like,
Well, let's start by talking about, like you mentioned, it comes from wine.
right.
So let's talk about why you do it with wine. So the first thing with wine is as you swirl, and when you swirl wine, you swirl pretty aggressively, right?
Right.
Like to the point where a lot of times people splash out of their glass because they're trying. And that's because oxidation in a lower proof spirit like wine happens pretty quickly.
Right.
And so you can see pretty dramatic changes. And so as you swirl it, you're definitely, you know, some of those flavors, some of the compounds are I don't know if evaporating is the correct word, but it's leaving the glass and you're picking that up.
Right.
But it's also the oxidation which opens up the wine. Higher proof spirits, from what I remember from my days in science, do not oxidize nearly as much. That's why you can leave
A bottle
your,
of whiskey.
your bottle of whiskey open for years. So you can't tell me that just a little bit of swirling in a glass is going to oxidize it to the point where it's going to change the flavor profile. If leaving it open on your cabinet for 10 years, which I have bottles that have been open that long, don't really change that much.
I think they do change that much, though. No.
Maybe some of your sherry ones or your peated ones that
Right.
have a lot of, you know,
Yeah.
volatile compounds in them.
Right. But I don't think they change that much in terms of like a good whiskey becomes bad. But I do think I've noticed that whiskeys turn a little flat when they've been sitting for a long time on the finish. Like there's
Maybe.
just something like a little bit bitter on the finish about whiskeys that sit for a while. Maybe that's a placebo. You and I have in the past tried Bowmore 25-year-old brand new bottle versus one that had been open for a long time, and we both agreed the brand new bottle was better.
Yeah.
And those weren't like bottled separately. They were two bottles from the same batch. One had just been opened years later. So I do think there's a substantial enough difference that we could both taste it and tell, like, yeah, this was the old one and this is the new one. I don't know that it's enough, but that was like years in a bottle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I can't
5 minutes, not 10 seconds of swirling.
right. And that's why I'm saying, like, I do think it does oxidize it to some extent.
Now, the bonus, like the reason that people think it's good is because as you swirl it again, some of those flavors come out of the glass. You're using a Glencairn, and a Glencairn is meant to funnel the aroma up. So you're definitely agitating it that way. The downside of that is that you're also going to have alcohol evaporating off of the liquid, right? And so that, I think, is the biggest thing for folks is if I run into somebody and they say, oh, if I swirl whiskey, it ruins the nose. I'm like, it doesn't ruin the nose. You're just sniffing it as you're swirling it. And so you're getting all the ethanol. Like that's what it's doing. It's burning your nose because there's ethanol coming out. Swirl it, sniff it, swirl it, let it kind of calm down,
Right.
and sniff it again. So, but yeah, this all started because he swore that it made the whiskey worse. He said he did some sort of blind taste test. I wasn't there. I don't believe him. And then I started to read a bunch of articles, and everybody seemed to have a different theory. Some people
Right.
were arguing for hyper decanting, which
Where
is
you
like
pour it through like an aerator and
no,
like,
they put it in like a magic bullet, like
Oh,
one of those
geez,
blenders, and like
no,
rapidly agitate it,
gosh,
and then let it rest
that's
for a while.
that's
and they
definitely
said
bruising
open
your
it up.
whiskey.
Yeah, and so it seemed to be kind of all over the place.
So
And the other part of this is when I went to the Bourbon Trail, we went to Willet, and every time you go to a distillery, you have a chance to go on a tour, and I always went on all of them. Just
and they
because.
teach you how to drink whiskey.
Yeah, and they teach you how to drink whiskey. And we went to Willet, and they were like, so, like, you know, the proper way to take a whiskey is, you know, you smell it, then you, like, you know, you swirl it a little bit, and you smell it, and you swirl a little bit. And then I went to Heaven Hill, and the first thing she said was, now, don't let me catch you swirling your whiskey. This isn't a wine tasting class. And I just literally went somewhere else, and that was what they told me to do. So I thought it
Yeah.
would be kind of fun to see if we could tell any difference with two whiskeys that are popular at different proofs, but are known to have kind of a strong aroma.
So here is my hypothesis, James. My hypothesis is that it will improve the higher proof whiskey more than the low proof whiskey.
Just because you're blowing off some of the alcohol?
Because what I think happens, and this is from using our like little toppers, is I think when you close up your glass for a little while, that aroma like builds up in that space more,
Yeah.
and you get a more intense aromatic experience. What I think happens when you swirl and then immediately smell is, yes, you are releasing more aroma in out of the liquid. Like, and I just say this from the fact that, like, if you have any sort of like oil diffuser or anything like that, and it's just sitting there and it's stagnant, and you go and agitate it, whatever it is, you know, it's your leftover food or whatever, it's like that always makes it smell more,
Right.
you know, when you agitate it, right? So I don't see any way that swirling the whiskey can't actually increase the aroma, other than the fact that when you've just been swirling it, you're also kind of shooting that out of the glass, so to speak. Like, I don't know what the air vortex inside is,
what it looks
but
like.
what it looks like. But I would imagine that you're kind of throwing the aroma out of the glass. And when you go immediately to smell it, I think you're getting less.
See, I think it's the ethanol that's interfering with it. I think because the ethanol to me should be coming out first. And so I think that just gets in the way of the nose.
Yeah. And my thought is, when you swirl and then sniff, all you're getting is the ethanol more.
Yeah, it could be.
And if you swirl and then let it sit for a second,
and like blow lightly on the top, like
yeah,
you gotta blow the ethanol.
That's probably what people should be doing, is
just blowing the
blow
ethanol
over
off
the top to pull, yeah. Okay, so here's how we're gonna do this. So I've got a blank glass and a glass with a logo on it, which, you know, poor science here, because maybe the logo affects the flavor.
Yeah, you never know.
So I'm going to have you close your eyes.
And we're starting with Weller 12, right?
We're starting with Weller 12.
Okay.
So I'm going to have you close your eyes, and I'm going to swirl the glass with the logo on it. And then I'm going to hand you one glass at a time.
Okay.
And I'm just going to have you smell it and see if you can tell any difference. And then I'll have you taste it after the fact.
Okay. So I'm going to be comparing the two.
Right.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and swirl this up. And I'm not going to do like a crazy swirl. This is just like a normal, you know, like roll it around the edges kind of thing. Give it what I would normally do. All right. So here is the first one.
Okay.
Now you got to not swirl it, which that's like kind of hard.
That's the hardest thing. Should I be comparing the two at the same time? Or?
Yeah. Here.
Okay. So you know which one's in my right hand, which one's my. So I can open my eyes now.
Well, no, because you'll see with the logo.
Oh yeah,
on
that's true.
James is studiously sniffing.
I will say, this is maybe totally crazy, but I feel like the one in my left hand has a little stronger aroma.
Little stronger aroma?
Yes.
Okay. Because I've always been curious if it affects flavor at all, too.
Yeah, they taste exactly the same.
Okay.
I can't tell anything.
But you think the one on the left has slightly stronger aroma? Well, don't drink all of it, because we got to do it again and see if it's just, because it might be so subtle that, you know, you're just kind of saying.
Yeah, I can't get anything on the flavor profile, but at least initially I felt like there was a little bit stronger aroma in the left hand.
Okay. Well, that was the one that I swirled.
Oh, look at
look at that.
Yeah.
All right. So
science. Now it has to be true.
You do the same. So swirl this one, and then I'll close my eyes and
we'll let it sit.
See, people, we chose Weller 12 so that when we post a thumbnail of this, we can have Weller 12 on there, and then people will click on it.
That's what we have to resort to on this. It's not the content that draws people; it's the pictures of the bottles. All right, you ready?
Know, it'd be really helpful. We have a decent number of people that actually watch the show on a regular basis, but none of them tell anyone about the show, and that's a real problem. We need. Yeah. I also need to make sure I'm not hitting my mic here.
I'll do that the way for you. Okay.
All right, so I don't get much on the aroma on the left. Definitely more on this one, on the right.
Definitely more on the right. Okay.
It's more powerful. Like it's richer. Like I'm getting more of the caramel wood notes on the one on the right. The one on the left is lighter. It's like a little more of like the kind of citrusy honey kind of that it's like a little more perfumey, I feel like. Let's see if they taste different.
This is kind of fun to watch. I like that you have to do the whole thing with your eyes shut.
I know, it's actually really hard. Very awkward.
And it's hard, you're right. It's hard not to swirl it because that's like a natural reaction for me when I get the glass in my hand, is just to start like moving the liquid around.
I mean, I think they taste the same, but the aroma definitely pops a little more on this one, at least at first. It seems to have dissipated.
I think it fades a little bit, right? Yeah.
So that's why you
did the same thing.
Yeah, okay.
And so that was the exact same experience. Like for me, the first time I smelled it, it was noticeably different.
It was a lot more.
And it was more caramel. It was richer. And then the second time I went back to it, it felt a little bit less.
Yep.
And then when I tasted it, it tasted the same. And then I smelled them and I was like, okay, it tastes almost identical now.
Yeah.
So maybe it is a thing where the swirling helps initially.
So, right.
But then fades after you let the glass sit.
So one thing that I think's interesting about this too is when you taste wine glasses are a lot bigger than a whiskey glass.
Oh yeah.
And it's very noticeable with certain wines. If you put your nose at the bottom of the glass versus the top, or like the middle and in, you get like the aroma has like space, like in a big Burgundy glass, to kind of stratify in terms of, and it makes sense, different aromas, whatever chemical chain it is probably a little heavier, lighter, whatever. Or it's just different parts of your, what side of your nose you're picking up more on. I think when you swirl it, you're just, it's a more intense. I mean, it is like, it was noticeable. I mean, I would say it almost smelled like two different whiskeys.
See, to me,
in the sense that like it smelled like one was at like 80 proof and one was like 100 proof.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah, I agree totally. I think it smelled not similar to me. It was just every little piece of the aroma was a little bit stronger,
right,
after you swirled it. And particularly, I think those kind of middle sweeter notes, like you said, the caramel, kind of some of the sugary notes, and the oak seemed to jump out a little bit more too. Whereas I think the unswirled was just maybe a little bit more dusty.
Yeah. All right. So Scott Stutzman says, I'm not a swiller. I assume he meant swirler. I pour, let it sit, then quick. Let it sit, then quick, then sip. So I guess he lets it sit for a little while and then sips. For me, the taste is the most important part with whiskey. I've had some bourbon that had either zero notes or not what was expected. So
yeah, I mean, I think, we'll see if this holds true for the higher proof here. But if I had to guess, I would have guessed that we were gonna be able to tell the difference on the nose, but not tell the difference on the palate.
Right.
And I think that's what this one did, at least. And so, yeah, if you don't really care about the nose, then I would not swirl it. For me, the nose, though, is really a big deal. That's my introduction to it.
Right.
It's like smelling your food when it arrives, right? Like that's how I first experience a whiskey, is on the nose. Otherwise, I would just drink everything out of a rocks glass.
Yep.
Because it doesn't make any difference. The whole point for me for using a Glencairn is because I want to experience the nose.
Right. And we did the test with when Chad was here, of the different glasses
with the giant
with like the giant mug.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, that's where and that's why I thought swirling it might impact the flavor, because some of what you taste is your smell. And so if you're diminishing the aroma by not swirling, in theory, you're diminishing the flavor as well, because you're not getting that adjacent aromatics with it. However, I think the whiskey has a strong enough flavor that the difference in a level of aroma between swirled or not swirled is not nearly as drastic as from tumbler to Glencairn.
Oh, no.
Where like when you drink it from a tumbler, I do feel like you're missing a little bit of a flavor component, even to the tasting experience. So anyway, but
and it might honestly come down to what kind of experience you want with the whiskey. Like when I go play trivia every Thursday, and I always ask for a glass, or I always get some whiskey. And some days I want to like, it's hard for people like us, Paul, to drink whiskey and not sit there and pick it apart.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's really annoying. So there's times where
I've gotten better about that. But.
Yeah, I'm still really shitty at it. And so there's times though where I'm like, you know what? I don't want to do that. Put it in a rocks glass and then I won't care. And I'm just going to sip it and enjoy it for what it is. And I'm not going to sit there and nose it and act like an idiot. But other times I want to do it with the Glencairn. So it may just depend on what kind of experience you want.
Yeah.
But it's at least encouraging that initially we're not going to be getting a huge change in flavor profile from it.
Right. Greg Spencer says, let me know if I need to sponsor some blindfolds for the podcast.
We really wanted to do that, but Paul doesn't have anything.
Yeah,
so.
I didn't. I was like, basically, I could go, get like a tie, one of my work ties, and blindfold James with that. But then it gets a little kinky. So, so maybe.
I mean, one of my goals in this podcast was to be blindfolded by Paul at some point. So we probably should do it.
That'd be funny. We would get a whole hell of a lot more views if we turned this into like a BDSM kind of
shirtless blindfolded
blindfolded tasting, dude. Oh man,
we would be rocking. It'd be great.
We would go viral.
All right, so let's do this now with the Stag Junior.
Yep. All right, so
and by the way, Weller is 90 proof, right?
Right.
And here we're looking at 130.2. So that's
baby.
We're going up into the stratosphere.
That's a heavy pour.
Well, that's what, if you're going to do this, I recommend you do it with a fairly heavy pour because you do not want the amount of liquid in the glass to limit the aromatic potential of the whiskey.
That is actually a good point. Is a lot of times, like when we taste, like when I do reviews and stuff and we're tasting on the show, I tend not to pour very much because I don't want to drink that much. And it really does impact the way a whiskey, how much you smell on a whiskey when you fill the glass here versus here.
Oh yeah.
Like it makes a big difference actually. So
yeah. And so you want to make sure, I think that you have
I try
an ample amount.
Yeah.
And then you also want it to be even, right? You don't want one to be significantly a bigger pour than the other because you're definitely going to get more nose off the bigger pour.
I got pretty close here. Okay. So we're going to do the same thing.
Okay.
I guess we have to let them sit for a second because we just poured them. So yeah, I think that was exactly what I expected.
I'm surprised, honestly, that the Weller 12 smelled that good after I swirled it. Because I was like, damn, that smells pretty good. But I wonder if it was just because you're comparing it, because I've never been super impressed by Weller 12, and you know that. I wonder if it's just because you're comparing it also against something that just doesn't smell that great and that didn't have a whole lot of aroma coming out of it. And you're like, hey, that's pretty nice. But it was a noted difference between the two. Now, prediction-wise, would you think that it's going to be more pronounced or less pronounced with the higher proof spirit?
I think it's going to be more pronounced.
I think it's going to be less.
I think more pronounced in the sense of one is going to smell noticeably less hot. I think the swirled one is not going to smell as biting or as singeing.
I'm going to go the opposite. I'm going to say you're not going to be able to really tell the difference because the lack of dilution makes the aroma so much stronger anyway.
The
swirling is going to be minimal, if nothing. Just because there's so much density of aromatics.
Yeah.
See, look how I'm getting technical.
Yeah.
The aromatic density, Paul, is so high already that I don't think it's going to change.
So,
all right, we ready?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just started. Thankfully, I started swirling the right one.
Don't swirl yours.
But all right. So I'm gonna go real aggressive on the swirl this time. Like,
oh, you got to keep it the same. Otherwise, this is flawed.
Well, no, I don't think. Oh, okay. I guess I'll say the same. That's kind of what I did. Give it a little roll around. Coat the edges.
Good job. I don't know why I have my eyes closed right now. I know which one you're swirling. But it's just kind of cool.
Okay. Here. Left hand.
Okay.
There you go. All right. Oh, he stumped. I think he's faking it. He just wants to be right. Oh, there won't be any difference. Huh?
I mean,
smell no difference.
these are really, really close. I feel like the one in my left hand maybe has a little bit more of an alcohol burn in it, but I don't know that I could otherwise say that the flavors are different. But I feel like this one's maybe a little bit bitier in terms of
a little bit
ethanol.
bitier.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no difference in flavor.
Yeah.
But this one felt bitier in the beginning. Now it kind of feels the same.
Okay. You can open yours. That's the one you swirled. Released more.
It released more of that ethanol.
Ethanol.
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
But you thought it was going to be less, right?
I thought it would be less because I thought it would kind of blow off some of that.
I wonder if it gets trapped in the top of the glass, though, because that's the whole point of the glass, right? Is to kind of funnel that up.
Right.
So, I don't know. Let's see.
So now maybe if we introduced a time component to this, is like maybe if we came back in 5-10 minutes, the one that you had swirled a bunch, like if you kept swirling this, maybe that one would be less hot because you've released the ethanol faster.
I will say that along with the bitiness, there was maybe a bit more sweetness, but man, it's like it wasn't as nearly as noticeable of a difference for me as it was with the 12-year.
Okay.
I'm doing this at exactly the same level of aggression.
Okay.
That was perfect, Paul. It was perfect. Because I'm a scientist and shit.
We should have counted how many times
it was replication.
we swirled.
All right, are you ready?
10 swirls or 20 swirls? Yeah, sure. Give me one.
There you go. Here's that one.
This is so hard.
Yeah, don't ram it into the microphone.
That one singes the nostrils.
It should. Yeah.
Okay, so the one on my right, all I get is more of the alcohol, I think. Yeah. The one on my left, I mean, that it's there, but I got a little bit more of like barrel char note to it.
All right.
I feel like the one on the right is hotter, but it's really dang close.
Yeah,
like
it's really tight, right?
It's almost like I don't think if you gave this to me 5 times, I would give you the same answer twice in a row.
And we should state that we are obviously trained professionals.
Yeah.
So if we can't do this, nobody can. We didn't taste them yet.
Oh, well, I forgot about the tasting part.
God, Paul.
But
what am I doing?
It was the same.
So both of us had the same experience where the one that was swirled
but
had a little bit more ethanol burn on the nose.
Yeah. It definitely does. Just a little bit.
Yeah.
It's not that much.
No.
But I definitely would have thought with the higher proof one, you got to swirl it more aggressively, get rid of the ethanol faster. And I think it does, obviously, because you're smelling it more.
You're smelling it, yeah. So maybe, I mean, that's the thing is you're liberating more alcohol by maybe swirling it, but does it stay in the glass?
Well,
right?
I'm going to sit here and swirl this for
like 10, 15 minutes.
For like 10 or 15 minutes while we sit in silence.
Just make an annoying noise.
Just make an annoying noise.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of interesting because it was sort of at the lower proof, the alcohol doesn't really get in the way, right? Like neither of us noticed that on the Weller 12 that
wasn't
it
any
smelled,
hotter.
Yeah, it didn't smell hotter. It just enhanced the flavor profile a little bit. And we were both able to pick that out. In this one, the swirling, though, because of there's just so much more alcohol in the spirit, we definitely got the alcohol on the nose more with the swirl. To me, it maybe was a little brighter, but it's almost hard to pick that apart, right? Like, is it truly brighter and sweeter, or is it just burning it a little bit more? And so it kind of makes the punch stronger.
I'll be honest. I almost couldn't smell anything in the one that you had swirled besides ethanol.
I could smell everything, but the ethanol was like, there was noticeably a little bit more of a singe to it. There was a bite to it.
Right.
Whereas the other one was a little bit more mellow. And again, it was maybe a little bit more dusty. But either way, though, it didn't interfere with my nosing of it. And this might be the difference between us, too. I'm used to nosing really high spirits. You're not.
Right.
And so for you, it might be a little bit harder to get past that ethanol burn.
Right. Well, I've been swirling this for a solid
Yeah, it's really fun to watch.
2 minutes. Yeah, it actually is. That's the other thing is like, regardless of your thoughts on swirling whiskey, it's really fun to do.
It is.
It's like a very satisfying thing.
Oh man. Now I'm gonna blow on it.
Oh yeah.
I cleared it all.
Blow it all out.
Oh, that worked.
Now you get all the
I got
juicy.
I got butterscotch and caramel
juicy
now.
aromas.
Yeah.
All right. So here, I've been swirling this one for a solid. Now this isn't blind. You can see which one it is, but
It's pretty similar to
pretty
me.
similar. And see, that's my theory is that if you swirl it long enough, you reach past the point of degradation, and then it starts. Now you're just actually getting rid of all that ethanol.
Yeah.
And you're
See
basically
if you
watering
notice the
down your
difference.
whiskey without watering it down. No, pretty much the same.
Yeah. So but then there's no point in swirling it, right? Because you're just getting the nose if it was flat. So maybe the idea is if it's a lower proof spirit, swirling it is going to be a little bit beneficial because the ethanol that's blowing off isn't really going to interfere with the nose, but you're going to get more of those sweeter flavor profiles out.
Right.
Maybe with a higher proof one, you either swirl it very lightly and let it sit for a little bit, or you just don't swirl it at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. Which I would say it's interesting because that's kind of the opposite approach of like adding water to your whiskey, right? Is like when you have a low proof already whiskey, adding water is almost always detrimental.
Yeah.
Like, yes, technically maybe you're releasing flavor still, but you're just destroying the mouthfeel so quickly that it's like, what advantage are you getting? Like, okay, yeah, you accentuate some of the florality or the sweetness, but it's like now it just tastes like water, right? If you only drink 80 proof whiskey, it's probably not the case for you to feel that way. But with higher proof stuff, adding water can definitely improve it just from that chemical reaction releasing, but you're not really watering it down. It's still a beefy spirit. And so I think it's interesting that it's kind of like adding water to high proof is beneficial. Swirling it
might not do much.
Maybe a negative in the short term.
Well, especially if you're not used to drinking or if you're not used to nosing higher proof stuff. So if you're really sensitive to ethanol, like if you smell whiskey a lot of times and you're like, ooh, that's hot, then there's a good chance that swirling it isn't going to do, it's just going to make it a worse experience for you.
Yeah, I think all swirling did was it immediately made it worse on the high proof, and then it was the same.
Yeah.
After that, for a very short period of time, it was worse
because you couldn't notice any difference in flavor profile.
No,
I couldn't notice any difference in flavor in either.
And even then, it was so close that I was like, flip a coin. I honestly don't know if I'm just in my mind thinking it.
Now this one, you swirled this a lot. So have you tasted them since you swirled it? Can you notice any difference?
Flavor?
My guess is probably no, but.
So the unswirled one tastes like Andrew Sims' hopes and dreams.
It does. Yeah. This is everything Andrew Sims wants to be.
I think the swirl one tastes hotter.
Even on the
tongue. Yeah.
Yeah. To me, I didn't get any difference.
That might have just been like a weird way I swallowed or something, but I felt like that one like burnt my tongue more.
Yeah, it's the same to me.
Same. Yeah, it's probably just weird.
Whenever we do stuff like this, Paul, I'm always happy when it doesn't turn into a giant cluster. Like I thought for sure we would be all over the map and we'd have.
I mean, we both had the exact same results.
Yeah,
on both ones.
And I think if you're used to nosing whiskey and you're used to tasting whiskey, I think it's pretty clear that I think we could do this with 15, 20 whiskeys in here and we'd probably have the same experience.
Yeah.
I think if it's lower proof, we're going to definitely be able to pick out the difference.
I would like to revisit this at another time with a peated whiskey.
Now, when we get into I was going to say when we get into peated and heavy sherried and stuff like that, it might be different.
That might be different, but
So do you typically swirl peated whiskeys?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. I swirl everything.
Yeah.
just out of habit.
You got to.
But I wonder, I think peated one would be a really good idea to do. I think you should just go do that now. Grab some of that Lafroig 10. That stuff's gross.
But
see if it's less gross after you swirl it.
we're already we're already in an hour, and we got
we've
got
a
lot of bourbon.
You have time for 2 minutes.
Yeah, but we need fresh glasses.
That's true. We don't have any.
Yeah, I don't have any more clean glasses. So I took them all. I just did a private.
I just want to keep drinking. So
yeah, I know. Well, we can say it. We can finish. We can finish these. But
yeah.
So anyway, people, there's your answer for you. Is but you should do it yourself. You should at home swirl your whiskey. Don't swirl your whiskey. Same whiskey, 2 glasses, and see what you think the difference is. Because I will say, like, it'd be interesting to try it with like a really old whiskey, like a whiskey that I know kind of develops in the glass more, and like something that's peated. You know, we could revisit this as part 2, because I think those are 2 other factors besides the proof that vary that from whiskey to whiskey it might be different.
Yeah. No, well. I do agree.
But
and I will say either way too, I don't think you have to be super aggressive in your swirling. It doesn't seem to really make too much of a difference. I think just kind of move it around a little bit, let it coat the glass is probably enough.
Emin, I can't pronounce that last name, writes in, I'm not sure if you talked about this already, but do you think swirling is a good way to coat inside of a glass to improve nosing? I guess it may depend on the speed of swirling. What do you think? Yeah, I mean, that was pretty much everything we just talked about. But yeah, basically what we found was the low proof spirit, the swirling improved it. The high proof cast strength, it actually was kind of worse right away. It released more just ethanol rather than flavor, or rather than aroma. But then it was basically the same after.
And I will say,
a minute or 2.
Getting to the coating of the glass idea, I don't know if that has anything to do with it, because then you're getting into the viscosity of the liquid, and it's probably a little bit out of my range.
But we should have done that. We should have had 3. We should have had a no swirl, the gentle roll, and then the heavy swirl.
Yeah.
But considering how little difference there was between the heavy swirl and the no swirl,
I don't think it would make much of a difference.
I don't think it would make much of a difference. Maybe on the low proof it would, but again, like I don't see any reason not to just do the heavy swirl, other than you like the way it looks. With the legs dripping down when they do nice beating.
And that's what I was going to say, that the one thing that swirling does give you is the legs. And so it gives you an idea about the viscosity of it and how thick it's going to be on the palate. If you just pour it and you let it sit, you're not getting that experience. So if that's something that you're kind of cued in on, then that's probably a piece of information you can take. I never use it for that, though. I very rarely look at it and look at the legs.
It's funny. I used to, when I first started drinking whiskey, I looked at the legs a lot. And then, like, I don't at all.
I still do with wine, but I just never noticed any type of, like, correlation for me between, like, obvious legs and, I like this, and no legs and I don't, or anything.
Right.
I just never noticed that kind of link where I do with wine.
And what's funny about that is, like, when I used to read reviews, because I was like new to this, reviewers would always talk about the legs on a whiskey. And I think in like the last 5 years, I mean, look at those legs. I mean, they're like barely dripping down. Like, it is kind of a thing, but I don't see anyone talk about it anymore when they review whiskey. That no one talks about the legs anymore. And
I don't see any discussion.
And I think I saw that was like 10 years ago. I think I saw it pretty much every time was like people talking about like it's got thick, oily legs or thin or whatever. And I'm like, they all look the same to me.
And maybe that's the thing is with wine, it makes a difference. So people wanted to carry it over, and then over time,
they realized
it doesn't do anything.
It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Other than like maybe there is a trick you can do, like shaking it to see the ABV by how many layers of bubbles there are. But again, what does that tell you? It's on the bottle. So
that's if you're making moonshine.
Right.
You shake it up and you look at the bubbles.
Right. Yep. So anyway, thank you guys for tuning in live. Those of you that did, remember we're doing this almost every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Tell your friends, tell your family, subscribe, follow us on TikTok, all that stuff. And you need to get a code to Taylor Lauren
Yes.
So you need to give me that discount code because she won the Whiskey Uncut bottle
Yes.
of Two Souls.
And she's local, so I can just probably hand it to her.
Well, that's true too. If you bring me a bottle, I can go drop it off or something. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Remember, drink, share, enjoy, and we will be back next week, right, James?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
We'll be here.
We're not going anywhere?
No.
All right. Cool. See you next week at 6:30.
Cheers.
Cheers.